So you weren't down at the Royal this morning?
Put the timer on to you. Okay, here we are, Bill Meyer. ThinkTech, we're doing something we call Sound and Music today with you, Bill Meyer, attorney, intellectual property attorney. Thank you for coming down. It's a privilege to have you here on the show.
Thanks, Jay. Good to be here.
Well, I wanted to talk about a number of things. We entitled this "The Role of Hawaiian Music in the National Art." I'm afraid there's much more to talk about than that. So hopefully we can find some kernel of truth about that. But meanwhile, let's fly. Let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about the local film industry, what happened in the legislature this year on the film credit bill.
Okay, great.
Bill.
Yeah, well, good news for Hawaii film industry. The legislature this year passed and sitting on the governor's desk now for signature is amendments to Act 88, which were absolutely necessary in order for Hawaii to stay competitive with the rest of the country. Much to the chagrin of people who opposed the legislation, it became pretty clear that these types of incentives are now part of the very DNA of the film industry, and that if you're seeking location work, you need to offer incentives, or else the work will go where the incentives are located.
That's a little scary. I mean, I know it's true, but it's scary.
Why?
It's to say that if you give out incentives, you get the work, and if you don't give out incentives, they'll go somewhere else. Even if you have a beautiful venue, it doesn't matter. Yeah,
but that's the way of the world. I mean, it's going to chase the dollars, and like I said, it was initially intended to prevent the production runs from going to Canada. This is, the state started out probably in the mid-90s enacting incentives because all the production work was leaving Hollywood, was going to Canada. And so various states started enacting incentives. Hawaii came on board in 2004, and we passed a modest incentive law at that time, and it has basically remained the same since 2004 until the legislature acted this year. And I'll just briefly go over what changes were made.
I'd like to know the substance of it.
So prior to this legislation, Hawaii offered various incentives depending on the island that the production work took place. If the production activity took place on the island of Oahu, it was 15% of qualified production expenditures, and on the neighbor island, it was 20%. And there was an $8 million per production cap. In other words, the most that a single production could get in way of a refundable production credit. And I have to emphasize that this is a refundable production credit. So the state actually, if you don't have an income tax liability, they cut you a check for the amount of qualified production expenditures. It's audited at two levels, both at the film office level and the DOTEX level. So there's protections there. But in any event, the original law was 15% on Oahu, 20% on the neighbor islands, $8 million cap, and the law was going to sunset in just a couple of years. What they did was they bumped it up by 5 points, so it's now 20% on Oahu and 25% on the neighbor islands, and they took the cap from $8 to $15 million. And the reason why that was really important for the state to do is that we're just so far behind all of the other states in terms of our incentives, especially with respect to tropical location work. Our primary competitor right now is Puerto Rico, and they just blew the doors off last year, increasing their incentives substantially. And unfortunately, Hawaii's lost some very significant projects to Puerto Rico that were on the drawing board.
Will we get them back now?
Not the ones that have already gone. A lot of people, I mean, the local news, when they were reporting on what the legislature did this session, they said, oh, well, and they showed Johnny Depp, and they were talking about Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, I'm sorry, folks, but the Black Pearl is anchored off Puerto Rico as we speak, and it's not likely to set sail for Hawaii anytime soon. These tentpole productions plan years and years in advance, and while they can sometimes turn on a dime, once they make a decision on where to do production work, it's pretty tough to turn the ship around, not to wear out the metaphor. But
yeah, well, it's a wonderful metaphor in that case. What about future projects? I mean, are we now competitive with Puerto Rico, or are they still ahead of us?
It depends how you analyze it. Hawaii has other things to offer, even if we're not quite there on the strict dollar incentives. We have a lot of infrastructure that Puerto Rico doesn't have. Plus, we have a lot of the creature comforts that the above-the-line people enjoy when they come to
hotel
Hawaii.
Industry.
Yeah, like beautiful places to stay, etc. But Puerto Rico is still going to give us our run for the money. But at least we're back in the game, Jay, and we got a fighting chance to get some of these projects.
What's their numbers? If we have 20 and 25,
they're 40%, but they're calculated a little differently, and it depends on whether you take into account residents or non-residents. So, like I said, you got to take all of these considerations in the aggregate.
Is it refundable for them?
It's a little different. It's a refund, and then there's other structure. I'm not super familiar with the specifics of the Puerto Rico. We're back in the game, and that's the main thing. Yeah.
You know, I wrote a little thing about it, and I said that it's good that we're back into film. It's good that we have, extended and improved the credit, but the legislature didn't do anything for tech. I mean, they did $6 million for tech out of a budget of, $20 billion. It doesn't mean much, and it shows, what do you want to say, a lack of interest. At least they're interested in film.
Yeah,
but I would sure like to see one connect with the other, as they were connected before.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, especially because the line between tech and entertainment is pretty much blurred, and so much of what you see on the screen nowadays is basically software and technology, CGI artists, etc. And it's a shame that we're not focusing on more of that, because our geographical isolation really is inconsequential when it deals with that kind of work, and so much of that work is done by small little businesses. And so, I mean, great place to live, good quality of life, fat lines running east and west. You would think that we would be interested in developing that business. But c'est la vie, not this year, I guess.
Yeah, well, I hope it comes again soon. But I actually think there's already a conceptual disconnect for the legislature, and they just don't see the two anymore in the same container, in the same ballgame. They don't see it as part of a larger innovation industry. Good for the guys in the film industry, but I think the tech guys are off on a limb somewhere, and I don't think that's going to come back anytime soon because of the lack of understanding on that.
Well, and you make a good point, because the type of work that the film bill will bring here is basically location work. So you're back to the typical Hollywood paradigm, which is Hollywood is where they develop the films, where they make the deals,
they hold the choices.
They make all the choices, they option the properties, they write the screenplay, etc. Then they start looking at their spreadsheets, and they look at creative considerations, and they say, where would be a good place to take this production work? And these guys literally sit at their computers with spreadsheets, and they plug in the incentives, and they look at where is going to be the best for our bottom line to take this production work. Now, sometimes creative considerations will predominate. If you need a certain shot of a spot, well, then you may have to go there. But you can do that with a secondary unit, and with green screen technology, any place can double for any place else.
Yeah.
So
look at our green screen, for example. We haven't even decided what's going to be on that green screen yet.
It's beautiful green. So you're right. It would be better if we took kind of a holistic view to it. But I suppose we just be grateful for what we got this session.
Yeah. Oh, I think so. But it does remind me of the way things work. As you said, the creative stuff, the real innovation, the real business choices are done elsewhere, and we get to execute someone else's plan.
That's right.
In most cases. Although we have some talented filmmakers here, and I just wonder, it's sort of like the other credit, the R&D credit that was passed this year.
Yeah, the 20%.
That would benefit big defense contractors, not likely benefit the mom and pop, research startups. I think there's a parallel, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is pretty much the same. The local filmmakers, they need capital formation. They don't have the money. They don't have the production budget. The studios and the major independents, they've got the production budget, and then they're just shopping for the best place to go ahead and do the work. But if you want to create a broad and deep crew base, if you want to have the talented people, that's one way to kickstart your industries, to have the big tent poles come in. And shows like Hawaii Five-0, by and large, hire all local crews. So we're starting to get a very highly sophisticated and trained crew base.
But you still need the investment to actually create the project to use that base.
That's correct. That's correct.
Yeah. You know, I mean, when The Descendants came out, I was very touched by that movie. I liked that movie. I thought
so did I.
It was a great slice of Hawaiiana that the world didn't know. There was a sort of cultural arbitrage happening. And what it proved to me was that we have stories here, 1,000 stories that the world would like to know. And that was just one of them. But it showed that, and in so doing, it showed that if you are creative enough, you can find the stories. In that case, a local woman and a Hawaiian woman and a Hollywood filmmaker put it together. But why couldn't we do both of those things and find our own stories? At the end of the day, I think if the credit generates that possibility, then it's well worth it, you know.
Well, it would be nice to see local investors step up and have
Yeah.
confidence in projects, and that's what it would take. I mean, at the end of the day, somebody had to get the ball rolling with Descendants and put some money on the table.
Yeah.
And there are some interesting independent film projects that are gaining some traction, completely local in nature, that are seeking out local investors, and you know, knock on wood, I think they have a chance of getting something, and that would be great.
Bill, I have to say I envy you being where you are. Let me just say that Bill Meyer represents a broad spectrum, may I say this, of creative individuals and businesses in Hawaii on the mainland, including local, national, international companies such as Walt Disney. We had a fellow on from Walt Disney recently. ABC Studios, NBC Universal, and many of Hawaii's top recording artists, I know that, record labelers and filmmakers. And you've taught at the law school, the Music Institute at Windward, and you were selected for inclusion in the Super Lawyer's book in intellectual property every year since 1932. What? Anyway, a long time.
Yeah.
So, Bill, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we're going to come back, and I'd like to talk to you some more about music trends, especially national music trends, and how that's all changing while we watch. We'll be right back after this break here on ThinkTech, Sound and Music with Bill Meyer. Okay. I want to break it up because I can use it as a radio show that way.
Oh, okay. You don't do commercials or anything in between.
Oh, they do.
Yeah.
I give them a moment, you know, and then we chop the edit, we sound the sound file, and then. How's the sound?
It's good. Is there any way to mute it right now?
What? Oh, no, it's okay. What we're saying now is we could say to the world. As a matter of fact, we are saying to the world.
Great. Sounds good.
There are people who don't really, you know, incorporate that thought, and they say things they shouldn't.
I can see what you mean about hearing the air conditioning now.
Yeah. That's okay. Okay. All right, we're back. We're live. We're here with Sound and Music and Bill Meyer on ThinkTech Radio. And it's great to have you here, Bill. And I want to go on to, I think, one of your favorite topics, and that is the music publishing trends in the country. And I guess that is a leader in the world. So what's going on with, record labels versus other possibilities in music today?
Well, talking about record labels, the industry trend is definitely towards consolidation. You know, I've been teaching music law for some time, and I can go back over my slides, and I go back 10 years, and there were 10 major labels, and then there were 7 major labels, and then there were 6, and there were 5, and now we're down to basically 3 major record labels, and that pretty much predominate the market. So there's consolidation is kind of the name of the game in terms of the U.S. industry and pretty much worldwide.
Does it have to be that way? I mean,
Well,
what forces make it that way?
Well, big money. I mean, you know, they think that a particular company has a market share, and one way to increase your market share is to absorb other companies, and that's the type of thing we've been seeing, and it's been an unstoppable trend for the last decade or so.
Does that mean little nippers don't get in at the pie?
Well, no, probably about 15% of the marketplace is truly independent labels. There are lots of labels that may sound independent, but all they are trademarks which are owned by the major, the big boys. But in terms of trends, what's interesting is that we're seeing kind of a zeitgeist shift in the way that music is consumed. And I saw it when my kids were growing up. I mean, you go into my office, which I think you've been in, you'll see hundreds of CDs on the wall.
I remember that well.
You go to my home, you'll see thousands of CDs. Well, my son is 30. I don't think he's ever bought a CD in his life. And the younger generations are more interested in having easy access to music, and they're less concerned about owning music. So the kind of zeitgeist shift we're seeing is away from ownership to listenership. And it's the change from music being a product that you buy and covet and own to something that you just want easy access to. And that is been in part facilitated by technological changes. And it is really what is the upheaval in the music industry.
Well, you know, I got a few years ago, there were all these sites that were copying music.
Yeah.
I forget the names. You might remember the names.
Napster,
Yeah,
Grokster,
and all that stuff.
Morpheus.
And they were taking music, and there was this sort of mass lawlessness. Actually, people knew there was a problem, but they would, you know, use the music anyway. And I guess my own feeling was, if you have millions of people who are disregarding the law and sort of buying into a system which, you know, disregards copyright law, after a while they're going to have to change the copyright law.
Yeah.
I think that happened.
Well, the copyright law has been changing in anticipation of technology, but it really has not looked at it organically and holistically. And in looking in the rearview mirror, we can see that a lot of the changes that were made really did not fully anticipate where technology was going. Back in the year 2000, I attended the first ever digital music seminar in Los Angeles. And on the left side of me was an attorney, I won't mention his name, but he argued one of the first internet cases, the Rio case, and with a prominent Silicon Valley firm. On the other side of me was Ice-T, the gangster rapper. And back then, people were trying to predict what the future of the music industry was going to be. We didn't get it right then, and where we're going now is probably back to a radio-type format. And back in 2000, I don't think we would have ever anticipated that.
What's a radio-type format?
Well, basically internet radio, where you have either a subscription or non-subscription, non-interactive music service. What Congress anticipated, and really to set the table to understand this, I should explain that when you're dealing with recorded music, you're really dealing with two separate copyrights. There's the copyright in the underlying musical composition or the song, which is written by a songwriter. And then there's the copyright in the sound recording, which is the particular fixation of sounds that are made by the artists playing instruments and singing, the performance, which is then recorded, and that copyright is usually owned by record labels. The copyright rights consist of a bundle of rights. The right to reproduce the works and the right to perform the works publicly and the right to distribute copies of the works are three of the fundamental, most important rights. Mm-hmm. Since copyright has been around as part of the 1909 Act, there was a performance right in the underlying musical composition. So that means that if you play that music publicly, whether it's in a restaurant through live musicians or over the radio like a terrestrial broadcast, that implicates the public performance right in the underlying musical composition, and you need a license from the copyright proprietor in order to engage in that activity. To facilitate the usage of those copyrights, the marketplace responded, and we have these common agents called public performance societies, and you know them as ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC. Mm-hmm. And the latter, the former two, operate pursuant to consent decrees with the Justice Department. Otherwise, they would be in violation of the antitrust laws. So for a very long time, the songwriters have enjoyed revenue streams each time their music is played on radio. And what these performance societies basically do is they collect revenues from the broadcasters, and they use radio broadcast as an analog for dividing up the other revenue streams from like hotels and bars and places of public assembly. Okay, so that's the musical composition side. Unlike that, the copyright in sound recordings wasn't even recognized under federal law. In other words, the Federal Copyright Act didn't even apply to sound recordings until 1972. And even after that, there was no public performance right. So although the record labels could sue if somebody duplicated their music, if it was simply performed on the radio, they had no obligation to pay public performance royalties.
Well,
so
we've come a long way.
Well, they still don't. They still do not. For terrestrial broadcasters, if it's whether it's KCCN or whatever, if it's a terrestrial broadcast, not an internet radio, and it's not an internet simulcast, the radio stations do not pay any license fees to the record labels which own the copyright in the sound recordings. Now, in 1995, the record labels finally prevailed upon Congress, and they said, look, we've got the emergence of this digital technology happening, and digital technology allows people to make perfect copies of the music. So my gosh, it's going to put us out of business. And this is when CD sales were really starting to, reach their pinnacle. It was the shift from vinyl to CD. So their concern was that
95 doesn't seem that long ago, but I guess it is a long time.
It is long ago. So they were able to prevail upon Congress to create a performance right in connection with digital transmissions only. So if it is a digital transmission of a sound recording only, so it doesn't apply to movies and other audiovisual works which marry sound recording and visual images, but if it's a digital transmission only, the law, as of 1995, recognized a performance right, which meant that if you are engaged in a digital transmission, you now have to get a license from the record labels that hold the copyright in those sound recordings. Very analogous to what you have in the musical composition side with ASCAP and BMI. But
does that mean if you're not in that category, that you don't need to get a license?
If you're not,
you only owe something to the original composer.
If you're a terrestrial broadcaster, you're not putting out a digital transmission, then you only pay ASCAP, CSAC, and BMI royalties, which are supposed to go back to the songwriter and the music publisher. Okay, but if you are putting out a digital transmission, and let's talk about what a digital transmission is, because there's all kinds of digital transmission. There's satellite radio, there's cable radio, like Music Choice, which you get on Oceanic Cable, and then you've got subscription and non-subscription music services, and they can either be interactive or non-interactive.
Why should it be different than terrestrial radio?
That is a good question, Jay. And the reason it is different is because terrestrial radio broadcasters, the Association of Broadcasters, have had a very strong lobby, and you know how Congress works.
This is a great country, or what?
Yeah. So they've been very persuasive in their lobbying efforts, and they've been able to keep the imposition of a performance right in sound recording being put in place for terrestrial radio broadcasters. So we've got all these different types of digital transmissions. So Congress said, okay, now we're going to break them down into two basic categories: interactive and non-interactive services. And if you are an interactive service, then you are required, as the broadcaster, the internet radio broadcaster, to negotiate licenses with every single copyright proprietor for every single song that you want to broadcast. Well, my goodness, that's going to be nearly impossible. I mean, the administrative costs would make that sort of endeavor cost prohibitive. So the other option was, if it was a non-interactive music service, then you could avail yourself of what's known as a compulsory license, and we'll talk about that in a second, because that branches off into different rate structures. And unfortunately, what this all collapses down into is, depending on the technology you're using, is going to depend on what your rates are. And what we really need to get to is a point where all of our usage is technology transparent. So it doesn't depend upon whether you're doing satellite radio or cable radio or internet radio. Everybody pays the same rate. And it would be easier, it would encourage innovation and the deployment of more and innovative music platforms. But unfortunately, what happens is one particular industry gets their vested rights in place, a favorable position, and they don't want to yield that to somebody else. So there's a lot of infighting going on right now. But let's go back to the interactive versus non-interactive and say, what does that really mean, and why is that an important distinction? Well, Congress felt that if a music service was interactive, in other words, if the consumer could impact what was being heard, then they could simply press record and it would cannibalize potential CD sales. So what they said was, in that case, if the consumer can dictate exactly what they're going to hear, that's going to cannibalize record sales, and you're going to have to go negotiate the licenses directly with the record labels.
Sort of an on-demand thing.
If it's on demand, then the music service is required to negotiate with the record labels. And we're starting to see more and more of that happen as the record labels finally realize that they can't hold back the crown jewels. Earlier you were talking about all of these, Napster and pirate sites. In a way, the record labels brought that on themselves because they were hoarding their crown jewels. When technology started advancing and people started doing file sharing, what the industry should have done was responded to that demand, and they should have made their content available innovatively through micro royalties. And instead of having an entire generation of kids raised with the idea that music is free and it's okay to duplicate it, we would have had them raised with the idea that you got to pay, but you pay a little bit. And a lot of a little bit adds up to be more than a lot of nothing. And unfortunately,
isn't that what happened with iTunes, 99 cents? I don't know what it is now, but...
they have tiered pricing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's micro. You don't have to pay, as much as you went in and buy a CD.
Yeah.
All this. So, I mean, it's changing, and you may not have on demand in a lot of cases, but you do have by category.
Right, and so that raises the issue of what actually constitutes an interactive service, because there's, whether it's Pandora or any of these other services, you can customize your own radio stations. You can indicate artists, and they'll start pushing you artists of a similar type of sound or genre. And Pandora has the Music Genome Project, which breaks down all the musical elements into all kinds of subcategories. And you can actually, through Pandora, access that and look at what that service has done in terms of exploring the elements of music. But the question remained, what constitutes an interactive service? And remember, the big deal difference here is that if it was interactive, you got to go to every record label and negotiate a license, which it's not going to happen. The cases have been slowly coming out. A case was decided, Arista versus Relaunch, a couple of years ago, and it basically said this, that if the user can anticipate the next song that's going to be played, then it amounts to an interactive service, and you need to negotiate specific licenses. Despite all the mumbo jumbo, if you can indicate what type of artist, the type of sound, as long as you don't know the next song that's coming up, then it's probably not going to be considered an interactive service. Probably, because that was only one circuit that decided that case. But that's the guidance that lawyers have now. So if it's truly on demand, you get to select the artist and the track that's going to be interactive, and you as the music service provider need to go get negotiated licenses.
There's been litigation about this? I mean, beyond that, after that?
Well, there's been a lot of controversy after that, because there's two types of rates that apply to non-interactive music services. And this has to do with kind of an anomaly of the timing of when the Digital Millennium Copyright Act was passed back in 1998. It basically said that pre-existing subscription music services and satellite radio, which at the time consisted of two companies, Sirius and XM Radio, and they've merged now, so it's basically Sirius XM. Those folks were subjected to what's known as the 801B rate. And to save you a very, very long, boring analysis, they're subject to a very favorable rate. Everybody that came on thereafter, so all of the other music services like Pandora, are subject to an entirely different set of circumstances called the willing buyer, willing seller rate, and both of these are set by the Copyright Royalty Board, which is a panel of 3 judges appointed by the Register of Copyrights.
Is there a good reason for the distinction?
Again, we go back to the lobbying power and the new kids on the block, and the companies that existed at the time prevailed upon Congress to, to set things in their direction. But to give you an idea of how different these rates are and how it ends up favoring one technology over another, in February, the CRB set the new rates for satellite radio, and it was previously set at about 8% of revenues. It was up up all the way to 9% beginning in 2013, and it's going to graduate up to 17% over a period of a couple of years. But compare that with Pandora. Now, the satellite radio folks, they get the 801B rate. Pandora and the other music services which came along after that, they're subject to this willing buyer, willing seller rule, and they pay north of 60%, 60 of their revenues. So you can see that the technology favors, in this case, the first comers. There was a bill introduced in Congress last year called the Internet Fairness Radio Act that you probably heard a little bit about. And that was intended to put all of these music services on a level playing field and basically extend to music services like Pandora the same rate, in other words, the 801B rate that satellite radio gets. And unfortunately, that bill did not make it. Artists and record labels opposed it because,
No, they wanted the greater compensation.
Well, they wanted to get the greater compensation, but the 900-pound gorilla in the room was who was sitting there going, nobody look at me, was terrestrial radio, which doesn't pay anything. And so I think in this upcoming session of Congress, we're going to see all the cards on the table. We're going to see Congress looking at the willing buyer, willing seller rate, the 801B rate, and the non-rate that terrestrial radio plays. And the best thing that could happen would be that everybody gets on board and pays kind of a middle ground rate, and everybody would be a winner.
With due regard for all the lobbyists, who is campaigning for the even playing field? Who's left to campaign? You? Somebody else? Who is out there in Washington campaigning for the even playing field?
That's a good question, Jay. I don't know that there is anybody doing that. Because the voices that you hear are the voices that have a vested interest in one of those extreme positions.
There's a lot of money to be made here. This is a big deal, not only in the U.S., but by second degree outside the U.S.
Absolutely.
And I wonder where it's all going to go. Just for your comment, what did I read recently that Google is coming on with a subscription music service?
As is Apple.
Yeah. And
Apple
you
Radio.
get as much as you want, any kind you want, for some modest subscription. And I think that's going to be very popular with a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it is. And some of these bigger players are, as we are speaking, are cutting deals with the record label to offer on demand. And so the bigger players are going to be able to bring the labels around. We talked about it being difficult to negotiate with everybody. Well, if you're big enough, you can cut a real good deal. Look what Steve Jobs did when he put, it took Steve Jobs to put iTunes together. And by the way, iTunes just celebrated last month its 10th anniversary. Can you believe it's been 10 years since the iTunes store
But it's sort of like ASCAP and BMI, isn't it? Because after a while, somebody's going to figure in the marketplace there's a need for some agency collaboration to solve that impossible, license problem, and somebody will plant a company in the middle of everything and it'll work. And maybe just for the big labels right away, but maybe after a while, more people, and after a while it'll become a structure that's in the music landscape to cover everything for everybody at a price.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, where does conventional radio go these days? Terrestrial radio, where does it go vis-a-vis the internet radio? But let's not talk about that until after we take a short break here.
Okay.
We'll take a short break. That's Bill Meyer. He's an intellectual property attorney here in Honolulu, who's thinking on a global scale, as usual. And we have the privilege of having him here in our studio with us to discuss these trends and issues. We'll be right back after this break.
See if I can find I think I actually get some numbers on terrestrial radio.
You getting good sound? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, so we have another 25 minutes or so, and I think half of it I'd like to talk about this issue. We spoke a bit earlier about the emerging delivery method, and then about Hawaiian music for the last quarter. Okay.
Yeah. She asked me about the Eminem case. Have you heard about the Eminem? You know who Eminem is, right?
No.
You don't know who Eminem is?
No.
The rapper? I know you're a white guy,
Yeah,
but
okay.
geez.
Ask me about classical music. Okay, I'll ask you about that. And you should say, funny, you should ask. Okay, we're going back. We're back, we're live, we're ThinkTech in Sound and Music with Bill Meyer, an intellectual property and music attorney who is in our studio today to tell us what's going on in that area. And Bill, before we took our break, we were talking about, what delivery method do you think will prevail with all of this contention, competition, and lobbying going on various competing methodologies?
Well, as we speak now, terrestrial radio still has a dominant place in listenership throughout the country. It's interesting, some figures were released not too long ago, which posed the question, how do people discover music? In other words, they get turned on to new stuff, and then what is the vector by which most people then listen to music? And the results were intriguing. Most people still find their music by listening to terrestrial radio. Mm-hmm. But guess what?
Stuck in traffic.
Yeah, exactly. And because a lot of people's listening time is sitting in their little tin box. But guess what the #1 source of music is on the planet right now, where more people listen to music than any other single source anywhere. The total music consumed. YouTube. Okay. YouTube is the #1 source of music.
On the cell phone or YouTube on the computer, or it doesn't matter, YouTube?
Just YouTube. So as we speak, there's still demand for terrestrial radio. But the internet radio folks recognize that people are sitting in their little tin boxes in traffic, and so they are making a push to have these infotainment centers installed in automobiles. And there's deals being cut as we speak right now between various music providers, whether it's Pandora or Spotify, with various car manufacturers to get their particular products loaded into the automobile so that you can do this by voice command. And that is going to be probably the most substantial competition that terrestrial broadcasters will face, and it could be the beginning of the end for them, frankly.
Yeah.
But they'll just transition over. I mean,
they already are.
A lot of them are already simulcasting on the internet, so it's not that far removed for them to just do away with their terrestrial broadcast and go fully internet. The only distinction is we go back to this rate difference. If you're doing a terrestrial only broadcast, you don't have to pay the public performance right associated with the sound recording.
Just a thought. I mean, if they're simulcasting, which prevails, the fact that they're terrestrial or the fact that they're digital?
If they're simulcasting the digital, the internet radio provisions.
So they expose themselves when they do that.
Yes, but since more and more people are starting to listen to internet radio, they really don't have any choice but to make that transition.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking that over time the transition will take place. But you talked about an entertainment center or something. This is a device. Yeah. That's actually built into the car in lieu of a car radio.
That's correct.
Possibly also including a car radio.
That's
I suppose.
Correct. Yeah.
Because it's not going to go away, tomorrow. And what does this do now? This does internet radio, or maybe television too.
That's correct. Well, I don't know about television.
So it has to have the signal.
It has to have connectivity.
It's not going to deal on radio waves. It's got to deal on wireless or
that's correct.
Or cell phone technology.
That's correct.
So where there is none, crossing the Mojave Desert, you're not going to get that. So you're out of luck. Then you have to go.
You might get satellite radio in those areas.
So it's that what do you call it? Multi-possibility.
Multi-platform.
Yeah. Multi-platform. So you can have a radio dealing on AM, FM radio. You can have wireless if you're in a city and there's wireless. So luckily there'll be a city with lots of free wireless. Philadelphia, I think. Oh, Chinatown here. You can deal on cell phone technology. Effectively, a little cell phone built into your dash there.
That's right.
The way some cars have it right now.
Well, like right now,
for phones.
You take your iPhone and you get close to a wireless center, it will immediately transfer over to your wireless base, and otherwise you're going to be eating up your cell phone time.
Yeah.
So the basic technology is there. It's just that it hasn't been integrated into the automobile, and that's going to be where I think we see another kind of quantum leap. I right now can hook my iPhone up, and I get Pandora and other music services on my iPhone, and I can plug that into my my Toyota Tacoma pickup truck and listen to Pandora.
Well, yeah, I mean, and you wonder why should you go through the trouble of having an internet, center? What'd you call it? Internet entertainment center.
Yeah, infotainment center.
Infotainment center. Why go through the trouble and have the negotiation and design the thing when all you really need to do is have it pick it up by Bluetooth or whatever from your iPhone? Because the iPhone, whatever's happening with all the rest of this, the iPhone is becoming totally ubiquitous.
Yes.
And if the iPhone or its cousins are becoming ubiquitous, then all you need to do is pick up the Bluetooth, and you have achieved the whole info. I really wonder where that goes because of simply the effort and the expense involved in setting up a more sophisticated system. Yeah. Is it happening? Can I go buy one right now?
The portable device?
No, in the car.
Sirius XM is in about 50 million automobiles on the road right now. In terms of internet radio, I don't know. Maybe there's some 2013 cars that are out there, but those deals are being literally negotiated as we speak now. And because of the lead time, it's not going to be a few years before we're seeing real market penetration with that kind of technology embedded in the car.
Got to see what happens.
See what happens.
The jury is out. It could be a beta tape.
Well, what's interesting is what's hot today is not so hot tomorrow, and
moves so fast. You never know who's leapfrogging who else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyway, but so if it's an unfair question for me to ask what is going to prevail because we really don't know what's going to prevail.
If I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't have to work for a living.
But it's like whatever we decide on here today, some other technology could slip by and appear tomorrow.
That's right.
Change everything.
That's right.
That's what happened with the iPhone out of nowhere. Well, but whatever happens here, music is going to change. Whatever happens here is content is going to change. And so it's not only the delivery method, but I can't put this in a quotable way, but the delivery method in a funny way dictates what the content is. Delivery method reaches the audience, reach a different audience, then the audience demands different things. And those different things are different content.
Well, I would like to think that good content is always going to prevail, and that it should be platform transparent, and the good stuff is what rises to the top. That was one of the quandaries that the record labels were facing, is how do we, when there's millions of things out there, how do you rise to the top? When I say record labels, I'm not talking so much about the big boys because they've got the advertising budgets for marketing. But what about the small independent artists that aren't signed to a major label? How do they get discovered? And it's been really tough on them. And so they've had to kind of build their audience from the ground up using social media. So on the one hand, what technology is a two-edged sword. Initially, it resulted in mass pirated material, unlawful duplication, file sharing, and took a big bite, out of the pockets of the record labels and therefore the artists. But if you're familiar with Chris Anderson's book, The Long Tail Economic Theory, that the other side of technology is that when you're not dealing with shelf life or shelf space, there's going to be somebody that is interested in almost everything. So the small guy at least has a chance to get out there and show his wares and make a few sales, where before you were fighting for shelf space in the physical stores.
This is an amazing disruptive change. Somebody could hit a really innovative thing, a really beautiful piece of music, what have you, and it'll go viral.
That's right.
All of a sudden, and the big boys won't have anything to do with it. It'll be all over the world by way of social media. Who knows? I mean, don't you get every day things in the mail that are extraordinary?
Yeah.
And they didn't come through any big capital concentration. They just happened.
Well, like Bauer's Harlem Shake, which a new artist, basically unknown, put together this mix that he did. It went on YouTube and it got hundreds of millions of hits. And now the guy is being courted by every major label. And Psy, you're familiar with Psy's Gangnam Style? I mean, I think that's north of 50 million hits or something like that, maybe way more than that. And these, this viral ability creates possibilities for the little guy that maybe have never been discovered.
Don't you think that's going to happen more and more, and the big labels will be marginalized? And I put this question to you. You're an intellectual property attorney. You can see this all clearly. You're at the 50,000-foot level. You're watching all those innovative people developing things, okay? Guy comes to you and says, I've got a very popular viral piece of music. People really like it. Help me, Bill. Protect me. What are you going to do? You're going to put him together with a big label? Or are you going to find some other way for him to realize his economic destiny based on this fluke of fate?
Okay, if the facts that you're presenting are, he brings me content that I think has enormous possibilities. Well, first of all, we'll try and approach labels and see if we can go.
Because they still have the power in the
They still have the power.
And they have the money to pay him.
They do, but it's extremely difficult to get their attention. And even though the content may be good, getting it in front of them, getting somebody to listen and cut a deal is very difficult. So close behind that as a second strategy, my recommendation would be get it out there. Get it out there. Put it on YouTube. I see too many artists just sitting hoarding their content because they're afraid it's going to get ripped off. At a certain point, you got to let go. There's that tale about how to catch monkeys in India. That you take a coconut and you cut 2 holes in the back and you tie a wire around a coconut tree and you cut a hole in the front. You put a piece of banana in it, and the monkey will reach in, and when he grabs the banana, he has a fist and he can't get his hand out of the coconut shell, so he's trapped there. All he has to do is let go of the banana and he will be free. Okay, that's a great analogy to a lot of artists. Sometimes you can hold so tightly onto something that it's never going to get out there. So
don't you lose your intellectual property if you go wide that way?
Well, theoretically, no. Just because you post something on YouTube, you're not giving up your copyright to the work. And
let me put it this way: you lose the money that you might earn if you relied on your copyright to actually earn money with your content.
You may lose a little bit, but even YouTube will monetize. If you start getting in the hundreds of thousands of hits, they'll actually start paying you money. And you can always pull your content back off YouTube. So once you've whet the appetites of people, then you can start monetizing. The other thing I like to tell my clients is you've got to always believe that your best work is your next work. If you start always looking in the rearview mirror and saying, this is my greatest work, I got to protect this, you're never going to move your career forward. So if you've got something that's killer, put it out there, let the people enjoy it, and if it takes off, all of a sudden there'll be a lot of demand for your content and you will be able to monetize it.
That's great news, and I'm happy to hear you say that, because that's encouraging for every young startup. Let's take one more break here, Bill. We'll be right back to discuss my favorite subject, how we're going to make Hawaiian music as famous as it was in the days of Webley Edwards and Hawaii calls. We'll be right back after this break.
I know
we can't talk about everything.
I think that was before my time. Webley?
Webley Edwards? Oh, he died in the 70s, the guy. But
that's when I was in high school.
He broadcast radio with all kinds of frontier hookups out of the Moana Hotel in the Banyan Courtyard there to the world. And he made Hapa music very, very famous.
I remember Hawaii Calls, yeah.
That was him. Yeah. And a lot of people have
Flip,
tried to emulate him but haven't done it yet.
That was Flip McDermott, right? Hawaii Calls. Hula Records.
Webley Edwards.
You mean he was the announcer or the personality?
He was the personality.
Yeah.
And he did Hawaii a great service. I mean, I think for years and years people came to Hawaii looking for him. Okay. Back on the record.
Okay.
This is like a deposition. Okay, Bill Meyer, we're back here on ThinkTech Hawaii, Sound and Music. Privileged to talk to Bill Meyer, an intellectual property attorney par excellence, who can tell us all kinds of things about music and intellectual property protection for it and the marketplace around it. And my favorite subject is Hawaiian music. And remembering back to the 30s, how Hapahali music became famous and maybe generated a whole world brand for Hawaii that brought us, you know, waves and waves and waves of tourism, made us what we are today in a funny way. The music seemed to start that out.
Well, as Chris Lee famously said, what brought Hawaii into the modern era was Jack Lord's Hawaii 5-0 and the jet airplane.
Okay. We were there.
Yeah.
But, you know, I wonder your thoughts about Hawaiian music and whether it's as successful as it could be, what we can do, what anybody can do to make it more successful. I mean, the phenomenon of Makaviva Oli and, you know, selling over the rainbow everywhere in every country in the world by the millions and millions. Why can't we do that all the time?
Well, you know, that's an interesting example you bring up. Of course, Israel's rendition was of a iconic classic that was not a Hawaiian song.
True.
What made
no
that,
copyright owner on it.
Well, no, they had to get appropriate licenses
right?
from the underlying musical composition. 2 licenses actually, because it was a medley of two songs. But what he brought to that song was a Hawaiian sensibility. It wasn't sung in the Hawaiian language. It wasn't a Hawaiian musical composition, but it was evocative of what life is like in the islands. And so I think that is an important point. That tells us that you can bring it's not Hawaiian music now. I don't think people would call that Hawaiian music. Your purists would say that's not hakumele. That's not, you know, it's not traditional Hawaiian music, but it's island music. And so that, I think, portends well for the industry, because if you bring this sensibility about what it means to be in the islands to contemporary classics, that you might breathe new life into those works. But that's a different subject than what we would call traditional Hawaiian music.
You're right, and it's only secondary to my principal question, which is, what about Hawaiian music itself?
Yeah. Well, it is genre music. It is not, you know, it's very unlikely that it's going to ever be up there with Taylor Swift or Justin Timberlake or rap or rock artists, just because it isn't simply not as well known and appreciated. People that come into contact with it are moved and touched by it and embrace it. But then the question is, how do you get it out to people? It's interesting that Spotify and Songza have channels with Hawaiian music on it, and you know, Songza can basically you select moods. Like, for example, you go to their music service and you say, it's after work, I want music to chill to, and it will pull up a bunch of categories, and one of them is instrumental Hawaiian music. So there's an opportunity for local artists to be heard by tons more people, and if it resonates with them, they'll build that as part of their music channel, whether it's on Pandora, and they'll be further exposed, and maybe they'll even click on buy and buy the music from iTunes. But again, it is genre music, so it just doesn't have as broad of appeal as other musical formats do right now. And local artists have, you know, they're doing okay.
Well, you know, I wanted to ask you about local artists. You know, it seems to me that if you took a magic carpet back to the 50s and 60s and see how all those famous names were doing that, how much passion they were putting into it, how much work they were putting into it, and how important it was in at least the tourist landscape here, and maybe more through, you know, Hawaii Calls, because Hawaii Calls lasted for a while. I don't think we have that today. I think it's almost accidental that some of these kids get into Hawaiian music. I mean, they're good, but it's not at the same level of passion, and we don't have what do you want to call it, a natural market selection process that brings out the best talent with the best content and all that. I think
I would disagree with that.
I want you to.
Yeah.
But
No, I think
that's my theory. You tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah. No, I think that there's just music in the blood of local people, and I'd say there's probably more pure talent per capita in Hawaii than most other places. Now, it does tend to fall into this particular genre, which is limited when you look at the whole universe of music, but extremely talented people. All you got to do is go to the Hoku's Awards each year, and which is coming up this Saturday, by the way, and you can probably still get tickets.
I'm sure you'll be there.
And you'll see some of the best and brightest, and every year I'm always amazed at the new talent, the new artists that are coming out, and so there's fabulous new talent
But
emerging.
is there new material? In other words, are they taking it to the moon? Are they taking it to the next step and the next step? Are they advancing it the way, you know, music is being advanced?
Well, there you have differing opinions too, because there are traditionalists that you know got quite upset when people were taking traditional Hawaiian music and morphing it and turning it into something else. So it depends whether you want to be known as a proficient virtuoso player of traditional Hawaiian music, or whether you're willing to push the envelope and morph into a different art
really
form.
good question. So where are we going? Is anyone doing it for one thing?
I think that there are artists that are doing it, and it's falling probably more into the world music category as they kind of pull away from traditional structure. I think an awful lot of our successful local artists are pushing the envelope. Take, for example, Henry Kapono. He has, you know, he can get up there and you know, play traditional stuff, but he's a rocker at heart, and we've seen other artists, you know, take their music in different directions, a lot of it in the direction of kind of reggae-influenced or Hawaiian music. But, you know, if it's slack key or traditional Hawaiian music, the folks that are in that field, you know, honor that particular tradition, and they try and live up to the standards of those that came before them.
Well, what can we do to make Hawaiian music more world famous, if anything? Maybe there's nothing we can.
When you say we, I mean you and me.
You and me.
Well,
starting with you, and I'll follow along.
Let your friends know. Let your friends know if you have a Facebook page. Post stuff. I do that all the time on my Facebook page. I recently posted some videos of Willie Kay and Eric Gilliam performing at the Maui Center. So just spread the word.
I remember part of my recollections of earlier decades is that the hotels would actually sponsor the concert. So the musician would come to the hotel, and they would organize it. They would be the promoter. That stopped somewhere along the line. Now you have to have a promoter in the middle, or there is no promoter, and the musician himself, he's the promoter, which is really too bad because he has to advance for the room and all this. Wouldn't it be better if the hotels actually took this issue under its wing and returned to old-fashioned times and build these performers as part of their regular offerings?
I totally agree, and we're starting to see some of that. Certain organizations, well, like the Royal Hawaiian Shopping Center, right smack dab in the middle of Waikiki. Of course, that's a Kamehameha School's property, and they have an excellent cultural advisor on board tending to that matter. And so what they do is they bring Hawaiian culture to the Malahini and Kama'aina in an entertaining and informative way, and you can always find some live music being performed down there. The Hawaii Academy of Recording Arts, HARA, which puts on the Hoku Awards every year, in May they call it Mele May, and they have events all through Waikiki where they're trying to get live music back into venues. You're right that for a long time live music kind of evaporated out of Waikiki. It was easier to just play CDs. They didn't have to pay the artists. Most artists, local artists, are non-union, and you know, they had a tough time making it. But we're starting to see some of that music, you know, come back into Waikiki. But local artists still have a tough time, you know, cracking the monthly nut. Some of them do tours on the mainland, on the West Coast, and frankly, the Japan market is huge for local artists. There are more halaus in Japan than any place else in the world, and halaus will pay a pretty good price to have local artists play. So a lot of our local artists make the I was going to say yearly, sometimes several times a year, trek to Japan to perform for the Japanese halaus.
So you covered this at a certain level before, but so if I'm a local person and I like Hawaiian music, what can I do to participate in making it global?
Buy music.
Buy music. Well, I mean, you're talking about go buy CDs down at the record store.
If you can find a record store, you can
find one. Right.
You can buy CDs.
Buy it off iTunes.
Yes, you can recommend it. You could buy, I guess, gift cards for iTunes. As a matter of fact, an awful lot of iTunes business is in gift cards. You could recommend to.
Well, give it a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Like.
Hey, check this out. I mean. Besides listening to radio, the way most people discover music is through recommendations from friends.
Word of mouth.
Word of mouth. If you can find local artists on YouTube, send a link to the YouTube to friends and family on the mainland and elsewhere. And if it resonates with them, if they think it's killer music, they'll in turn other friends onto it and pass it forward.
We all got to do that, as far as I'm concerned. It's part of our statewide brand. Anyway, Bill, thanks for coming down. I hope we can do this again. I know it changes all the time, and it'd be great to have you come back from time to time and tell us what's going on.
We'd love to.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay, thanks.
Aloha. Okay, now you can try to turn it off, David.
What can we do? Well, we can pass a law saying everybody in Hawaii must buy one record.
Well, I think,